This is Unboxing, a segment of the show where Jessica and I explore some of the more nuanced elements and finer details that make up the worlds of board games and brews. There are a lot of cogs and gears that turn within both of these great passions, and we cover them here by unboxing them.
Today's topic is another one of those things that Bryce and I have been pondering for a while, but never could find the right time to discuss it on air until now. The question we'll be asking today, should certain board games start adopting some sort of age-restricted rating system?
You may have heard about an upcoming board game called Night Shift that has been generating a hell of a lot of buzz, and why wouldn't it? A modern board game all about working a shift as a stripper, cruising for clientele and earning money with private dances, was definitely going to turn some heads, especially when you see those miniatures. Obviously, there are some strong sexual themes here, typically reserved for at least an 18 and older crowd, but it is far from the only board game like this.
That's right. There are a ton of board games out there that lean heavily into sexual themes, and I'm not talking about those cheapy games for couples you find at sex shops or Sensors. These are modern games with modern mechanics, styles, and components. The same can be said about games that include gratuitous amounts of violence, gore, and foul language. Given the often colorful and imagination-capturing artwork and styles that they comprise, board games, by their very nature, are designed to appeal to children. Actual subject matter be damned.
Ratings, parental advisory warnings, and age restrictions can be found in just about every other form of entertainment. Movies, music, video games, drinking, and even strip clubs all come with some sort of barrier excluding individuals of a specific youthful age. Board gaming seems to be the only thing out there that hasn't done this. You will see age suggestions for a game's complexity, but hardly any restrictions regarding its content specifically.
But can a rating system like this actually do any good in the world of board gaming? Is it even practical to attempt? What changes, for better or worse, might we see come about if something like this were to be implemented? Should game designers and publishers or some other ratings agency be in charge of the content your children are exposed to? If so, why? And if not, then who?
As a board gaming channel and podcast that makes content clearly and obviously for adults, we figured we might have an interesting take on this one.
That's why Bryce and I will be answering and exploring all of those questions today as we unbox the practicality of an age-restricting rating system within the world of board gaming.
So, a lot of games out there with some heavy adult themes, one specifically coming up that's about being a stripper. It begs the question, Jessica, should board games come with ratings? What do you think about this? Just your initial thoughts.
My initial thought is no, because different people have different ideas of what content is appropriate for their children. I feel like the parents should be the ones to decide. Look at what's in the game and you make the decision yourself about whether or not it's appropriate for your kids.
I do think there are games out there that are not at all appropriate for children. But how is coming up with some sort of rating system like they do with movies or even video games, how is that even feasible? What would you do? Would you set up a committee? Who's the committee made of? Who makes the rules? What are the rules? How corrupt can this system become? Because if you look at movies and video games, it's a very corrupt system. Like what becomes a rated R movie for one filmmaker might not be the same for another. Do designers have to pay to get their game rated? Does that mean we have to pay extra for the games? Rampant corruption. Who decides what's moral and what's not? I just don't see how it would work.
I mean, even just the idea of someone else getting to decide, like, the age brackets on what's appropriate, like the way they do for movies. And most people, I feel like, don't even pay attention to the movie ratings.
No, they don't. I mean, to some degree, right? Like you see an R-rated film and you're like, okay, well, I probably won't take my 5-year-old to see that. You could put it on a board game, sure, even if you were able to figure out how to centralize some sort of authority. But you might have, I call it the NWA effect. They were the first rap group, the first musical act to have the parental advisory sticker put on their album, and that just actually increased the sales. More kids sought it out than they would have before. So you might create this effect where you sit there and go, hey, adults only, and then kids flood to it somehow. Their older brother gets a copy, something, and then they see it anyway. The other thing I worry about too, Jess, and tell me what you think about this, when you start putting forth rules about censorship, all you do is scare the designers away from making games that they want to make. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to make a game, it's going to be this violent, or it's going to have this much sex in it, and this is the game I want, this is the art I'm making, this is the thing I want out there, now they start self-censoring. And I know we just watched a video about Stalin, but I mean, self-censoring because you're afraid of being punished by a censoring, authoritarian, centralized body, that's never a good thing.
I think that's a really good point to bring up. And not to say that people don't already consider those types of things. I mean, generally speaking, if you're trying to pitch your game to a family-friendly publisher, they're going to want to see a family-friendly theme, something that's understandable for children, something that's, appropriate in terms of the artwork and the level of violence. But at the same time, because a lot of people are publishing independently, they're using the crowdfunding, people generally are using their own creativity to the limits where they want it to go, right? There are games out there that are gory and violent, and there are games like the stripper one that are sexual, or at least, feature sexually dressed meeples or minis or whatever. And I think it's good that that creativity isn't stifled. I think that you're absolutely right that if there's an entity in force, then people are going to have to start thinking, like, what are the consequences here? Am I going to get funded? Am I going to get penalized, etc.?
So let me ask you two questions. One, do you think because board gaming is kind of naturally geared towards a family-friendly element that most designers are going to lean that way anyway because they want sales, and the ones who don't, it's going to be really obvious? Do you think that's kind of the case already, so we don't even need a centralized authority? And two, if we had a rating system, do you think this would actually encourage people because they can now hide behind the NC-17 or X-rated or whatever you came up with? Do you think that would actually see an increase in really graphic, violent, sexually explicit games because they can go, hey, the rating's there, man. You've been warned.
I would say, to address the first part of your question, I don't know. I do think that when games are geared towards adults, they're marketed as such. And so it's very clear, it's very obvious this is an adults-only game. Something like Major Woody's Wild Foursome, that is a game that is marketed for adults.
Well, let me ask you, what about a game like For Glory, which on the surface, it seems like a game for everyone, and then you start looking at some of the cards and the rule book, and there's guys getting speared in the chest, and there's blood flying everywhere.
Well, I think that one's really tricky because for a lot of people, that's not something concerning for their kids to see, which that's debatable. That's its own totally separate subject, which I guess goes to our first point of who gets to decide what's appropriate and what's not.
Right.
But there are some people who would see that and think, absolutely not. There's no way I want my kids exposed to this. And there are some people who would see that and think, so what? They've seen worse in movies and video games, and they know that these things exist. So what's the point in censoring them?
And so my second question again, do you think if we had this rating system in place, it would actually encourage people, because they can hide behind the rating now, to be more explicit or more pervasively violent or have more language, etc.?
I don't think so. I think that if people want to go that route, I think they're going to do it, especially because there's so much independent or so many independent creators, right, using crowdfunding. And I think they figure if there's an audience for it, they might as well make it the way they want to make it. And what's going to stop them?
I'm opposite of you. I think if you had the rating system out there, people would hide behind it and make more graphic, violent, sexual games, because then they can sit there and be like, hey, you were warned. The rating's on there. That's your thing now.
It's definitely possible. I mean, we can't really know without doing it, but I would think that it wouldn't really change.
Oh, see, I think it would. I think it would have the same effect as people who, and studies have shown this, drive more recklessly when they know they have the protection of a seatbelt covering them. People are just kind of that way. But either way, though, I think we can both agree this wouldn't work. We surveyed some people on Facebook, and they all said the same thing. They don't want to see a centralized authority. They're afraid that it would make the game cost too much. And who gets to legislate what is okay and what is not?
It's silly to even try. In a world where you can walk into any kind of department store or pharmacy and see sex toys or graphic art on t-shirts, these things are already out there being exposed to children in public. So what's the point in trying to censor them in their homes when their parents already have that job and that authority?
Let me look at this from a different angle. Parents are the ones who should decide what's best for their kids. Centralized authority rating board games seems like a bad idea, but we have this thing going on in our society right now, in the West specifically, where a lot of people, I guess it depends on who you watch for news, but it seems that at least a small minority of very loud people are more and more okay with exposing kids to very adult themes. Disney is sneaking it into their cartoons. You have people taking children to drag shows. More and more people are okay with the idea of their kids being hypersexualized or exposed to sexualized situations very, very early on. So from kind of a wide view of society, what do you do? Because maybe it's not snuck its way into board gaming yet, but eventually it will somewhere down the line. In fact, there's a board game, I don't think it got backed. I don't even think it made Kickstarter because it was just so atrocious. It was about young kids running around inside a woman's vagina, like being chased by monsters, and like their virginity was on the line. I mean, it was just absolutely fucking disgusting. What do you do as a society at large when you have all these things coming at kids? Does that make a case for why a rating system might be needed?
This is a really tricky topic because even if there is a rating system, if the parents think it's okay, they're going to let their kids see it anyway. And there are certain things where you draw the line, right? Like a parent can think that it's okay to sexually abuse their child, and that's when society steps in and says, no, there's a line there. You cannot do that.
But that's the tricky part. That's what I'm saying. The line seems to be blurring. Do you, in a desperate situation, kind of like with Rome when the barbarians are at the gates, give all the power to Caesar and risk him never giving it back? Or do we sit here and go, well, it's still in the parents' hands and we just hope for the best?
Well, I don't think that a rating system would change anything. If parents think that it's okay, like I said, they're going to show that stuff to their kids anyway, unless you go so far as to start, penalizing people for letting their kids watch R-rated movies or play X-rated board games. That, I think, is really over the line. That's a huge unconstitutional leap, right? You can't do that.
When it comes to exposing kids to sex stuff, we're having a constitutional conversation now, but there are limits, like you said. There's no constitutional protection for exposing children to graphic sexual situations, whether it's in a book or a movie or a board game. You can get in a lot of trouble for doing stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think that, unfortunately, letting kids see content that's not appropriate for them, even if we think it's morally wrong, even if someone else thinks it is or doesn't, there's not really much you can do about it.
I agree with you that the rating system isn't the answer. I do believe that adults in any given society do have some responsibility when it comes to protecting children from the most extreme things regarding adulthood, especially in a graphically violent or explicitly sexual nature. History has shown time and time again that nations who protect their children and allow their children to be children flourish, whereas nations who do not seem to fall apart rather quickly. And the reason is because kids are the future, and if you don't raise them right, they don't become adults who act right, and therefore society collapses. So when it comes to things like pervasive violence or extreme sexual content, most adults can't handle that stuff. Like psychologically, they don't have the makeup for it. So the idea that children would be able to handle it is just absolutely fucking bonkers to me. So I do believe, as a whole, we should be protecting our kids from that kind of stuff because they don't have the psychological makeup to understand it or grasp it. However, when it comes to a board game rating system being any kind of answer, I agree. I was playing devil's advocate. I don't think you can save the day with a centralized authority. Most people agree. For no other reason maybe than it's just an extra cost to the designer and therefore us as the consumers. You just got to be involved with your kids as parents, I think. I think you have to use your judgment. I think there is a very obvious line that you don't want your kids to cross. I know there are games that we take off the shelves when kids come over, and I'm going to continue to do that. And, the parents can decide what's best for them, and I will put games on the shelves when I feel comfortable. Simple as that. I don't think it's that hard to be the fucking adult in the room.
I would absolutely agree. And I think that for the most part, game designers are responsible enough to make it known when there's content that might be questionable. They will usually, it's pretty clear in the advertising or on the box that there's going to be, foul language or any kind of nudity. And I think, or just even adult themes, right? And I think that helps. I think you should look at more than just the box as a parent before you decide whether your kids should be exposed to something. But I think that we just have to work together as a community. The designers need to be responsible enough to say, hey, you might want to take a look at this. And the parents need to look at it and say, hey, this is or is not appropriate for my kid.
I agree. This is an issue that we have to work out ourselves. Do you remember when we talked about, not on the air, but just I think it was a few days ago, art in games that was overtly sexual? Mm-hmm. Like the chicks with the huge tits or the female squirrels that had human female body parts and all that weird shit. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
What do you mean? My personal opinion about how appropriate it is?
Would that be something that would, is that something you find to be a problem when it comes to exposing kids to these kind of cartoonishly graphic sexual things?
I think it just depends. Anything where it's overtly caricaturized, I think that's usually a problem.
I think it's gross.
Like the original Barbie, where she was just teeny tiny waist and giant hips and giant breasts. Proportionally speaking, it's when you start exposing kids to unrealistic body shapes, especially when it's accentuating sexual parts.
Well, think about this though. The characters being drawn, typically, let's be real, by men. I think enough research has been out there now to show they're drawing out their sexual fantasies, and now they're exposing it to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely gross and it could be problematic, but I think it's still not really for me to decide for someone else's kid, you know?
Yeah, a rating system isn't going to help that. I just wanted to make sure I threw out everything. Yeah, a rating system isn't going to work. I think we've said all we can say about it. The moral of the story is, as an adult, as a parent, be involved in your kids' lives, and you have to make those proper decisions. I think there is a baseline of like, okay, kids shouldn't see this, whether it's violence, sex, language. They're not old enough to understand or comprehend it at all. And I think it's fairly obvious. Maybe not. Every parent's different. But I do think we do have to have, societally speaking, again, a rating system's not going to help this, kind of a base level that we can all agree to. But that's a topic and a conversation and a struggle for a different podcast.
Right. A rating system, it's not going to solve any problems, or even if these are problems. It's not going to stop people from doing what they do. So what's the point? It's just going to cause more problems, I think, than good.
So there you go. Jessica and I both feel that a governing body regulating what games should be rated this or that, bad idea. It's better that the designers and publishers themselves put the ratings on their games if they feel that it warrants it. What about you, though? Do you think a governing body for rating games is a good idea? Have you ever come across a game where you felt, ooh, maybe I shouldn't bring that to the table for X, Y, and Z reasons regarding violence or gratuitous sex? And most importantly, if you think a governing body would work, why? If not, we want to know why as well. Leave all your thoughts in the comment section from wherever you're listening. We would love to keep this conversation going.
And while you're giving us your thoughts, you might as well click that share button and share us with your friends so they can join in the conversation too. As always, go ahead and like and subscribe and leave us 5-star reviews. If you give us less than that, we will cry. So just don't.
I'm not going to cry. I'm going to get angry. And then I'm going to get even.
And then I'm going to cry because you'll be in jail.
Only if you get caught.
Yeah.
This is getting weird. Okay. What do we have coming up? We're not really sure. We have a lot of good stuff coming up, but we don't know the order in which it's coming.
Yeah, we're still tinkering around with it a little bit, but just know that whatever's next, it's going to be awesome.
Well, you know, the summer is wrapping up, so I can hint at one little thing. Autumn is our favorite time of year, and we're definitely going to showcase that, as it were, in the weeks to come.
So keep your eyes and ears peeled for some special autumn surprises.
Not sure if we'll be back next week or the week after. This time of year gets really busy and hectic for us, so bear with us. But in the meantime, whenever we see you again, I'm Bryce. That is Jess. You've been listening to the Game and Drink Connoisseurs podcast. We'll catch you later.
Bye-bye.